Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm Mark Cashman here with my co-host Chris, who may be a little sad because the Patriots didn't make it to the Super Bowl. McNulty.
Well, thanks, Mark. I'm just checking on the Broncos and the Seahawks. Are they playing this year?
Hey, Seahawks did pretty good right up until...
They didn't.
Oh, we should probably just keep going.
Yeah, we'll keep going. Today's episode, we're trying something slightly different. Mark and I are going to cover 3 topics from a customer perspective. We're going to bring the voice of the customer here into the studio virtually. We're going to take a look at establishing knowledge networks through the perspective of Mott MacDonald. We'll look at employee onboarding and document processing through experiences with HAVI. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at how you can streamline communications, looking at Marks and Spencer as an example. 3 UK-based companies, and somehow I was only involved with 2 of them.
It happened to be that you were across the pond, but you can't cover everything, Chris.
No, but for the sake of our audience, we're recording this in mid-January. I am 36 hours away from stepping onto a plane to, yet again, Microsoft Ignite the Tour London.
Maybe we'll have a 4th customer voice at the end of this.
I hope that we do. Anyway, we're going to try to do this very succinctly. So if you go into the show notes, you will see our 10-minute timer, which we will use to hopefully compress everything that we have into just distilled goodness from Mark and random sports references from me.
So we have 3 topics. That means 3 10-minute segments. First 10-minute segment is ready. Flip the timer, Chris. Here we go.
So the first topic is establishing knowledge networks. This is central to our mission as we've expressed through Project Cortex, which is one of our late 2019 announcements from Ignite. Mott MacDonald is a global engineering and management consultancy based in the UK. They have 16,000 employees worldwide, and I sat down with them last October to talk about their vision for knowledge, what they call connected thinking.
And so in this clip, we're going to start with the voices you're going to hear from the video. You'll hear from John Rains. He's the Divisional General Manager. Simon Denton, he's the Productivity Applications Architect. And Claire Mills, who is the Graduate Civil Engineer. They're all going to speak to us about the Microsoft vision for creating knowledge networks and how it relates to Mott MacDonald.
Our mission really is to open opportunities with connected thinking.
Connected thinking is our approach for connecting content to people and people to content, enabling just-in-time information to allow projects and their teams to get their best value for their clients and for the business.
We have 47 practices globally. What that does is ensure that people sharing the knowledge between themselves and delivering that through to projects.
As an engineer at Mott MacDonald, you could be involved in 4 or 5 projects per given day.
Everybody in the company is part of a different knowledge community, or possibly several. It's sharing that knowledge throughout the business, no matter which section you're in.
We think knowledge sharing is going to change extensively over the next decade or so.
I really love sitting down with Mott MacDonald. Mark, I know that you got to hear this again. What were your takeaways from the Mott MacDonald experience?
The thing that I really loved hearing is this notion around connected thinking, how they wanted to connect all their engineers from across all the disciplines and, of course, regions, and how that then falls upon this need for creating the knowledge networks. They must have a ton of information sharing, and it's not as easy as click and share a document. It's not as easy as may or may not have heard this big news, but is really dependent on growing this corpus of information so that everybody can tap into it.
You know, when we were on site filming this in Birmingham, England, if you've watched the video, and we have the link in the show notes, when you saw them collaborating and in the background it says connected thinking, you may think that we staged that. That's actually the first background shot that we did, and we actually said, we think that we're done. It's wonderful to work with Mott Mac because they see this idea of connected thinking as being part of their organizational mission statement. So they have connected thinkers, connected thinking as a manifesto displayed throughout the firm. And they really see it as integral to unlocking the knowledge that people have in their head and in their content and in their work practices and being able to bring it into a team or organizational context to help them do more.
So if you've been connected with Mott MacDonald, specifically around Cortex and what they're thinking around knowledge networks, there's a lot of activity that's happened in the past. It may have been how Mott MacDonald did it or not, around this notion of people portals, the concept of finding the expert, the right expert at the right time, is usually a challenge, especially for larger organizations going into new territory or even staying within the old territories where they make their biggest profits. How would you describe people portals of the past and how they were built, and the notion of moving this into the value that Cortex will layer in, obviously beyond just a portal?
I'd say that the portals of the past were highly manual. So the end result, the end experience that you can deliver to your users, you could, in theory, build the same thing just out of SharePoint, Yammer, and some of the other Microsoft 365 building blocks. But the pressure would be on you to make sure that information was manually classified, manually built, that you're manually building all of those pages and card experiences. And if you put that very high level of effort in, you can get to that engagement. The other thing that I would distinguish is that if you think of the whole history of knowledge management, which is a discipline that started rising in the late 80s and early 90s, as we've been designing Cortex, one of the things that we looked at is what failed. And if you look at all the investments that were going on 20 and 30 years ago, there were some things that just weren't ready yet. We didn't have capacity and processing power. But a lot of the techniques were disintegrated and were disruptive. And so people love the idea of disruptive technologies, but when you're being, on a practical basis, if you're trying to deliver information to people, every time you interrupt them, it's, on average 26 minutes to get back on task. So I'm going to ask Lisa, our engineer, do we have a 26-minute egg timer to allow the audience to experience a 26-minute delay? I'm obviously kidding with that. And if you look at where even Mott MacDonald has come from, they've made tremendous use of Yammer as being an essential building block to forging those 47 knowledge communities that they have throughout the firm.
The thing, though, I think is also different, and hearing how you've described Cortex before, and I want to give you a chance to do that again here within this context, it is not a portal or a singular entity that we're trying to solve for, and that is not what Mott MacDonald wants, nor do we hope the rest of our customers. How is the design of Cortex going beyond that single portal?
If you think about one of the principles of good portal design, which I know that longtime friend of the show, Sue Hanley, has spoken about frequently. Note to herself, we should probably get her on at one of these points.
It's a really good idea.
Sue likes to talk about start with the business results and work backwards. And the voices that you've heard today were a microcosm of the different communities on this project. John is not technical. John provides management, capital, and kind of the business steering. Simon is technical. Simon is a longtime Office Server and Services MVP and has worked with Microsoft and a lot of other things. And Claire is their customer. She is a typical engineer who is going from project to project to project. So, the top level goal is not how do we build a better portal or how do we integrate technologies. Their top line goal is how do they make the business twice as efficient, twice as big without having to increase headcount. And there's technical aspects to it and there's user aspects to it, but it's that top level vision that they have. It's not expressed in terms of technology integration. It's in terms of a business advance.
So before the grains of sand go out in this first topic of 10 minutes, in the context of establishing knowledge networks, and you had just mentioned headcount, that's certainly usually thought of onboarding or the full set of people who are working for the company. In the context of retirement, people who are retiring from a company and the knowledge that's in their head or in their documents that may or may not be centrally located, and I've heard this referred to as the silver tsunami. Mm-hmm. Where does this come into play with how the technology and maybe best practices can support managing and maintaining networks even when people leave the company?
I actually think emphasizing that silver tsunami idea is misguided in terms of 21st century knowledge management. If you think about what a workforce looked like in the 80s and 90s, most people on a team came to the same place at the same time, 9 to 5. They were usually in the same cubicle farm or office area, and they'd get together to collaborate. There are changes in team composition and workforce dynamics. So yes, the idea that people would come to a company, work there for 40 years and move on still exists. But there are other pressures there. We've seen kind of the rise in task work and millennial work. And so there's just a lot of turnover throughout the entire lifespan of an employee. One of the many goals that Mott MacDonald has for connected thinking is individual empowerment and individual engagement. The way that someone comes onto a project is helpful immediately, being able to tap into the right knowledge and expertise. But they also want to give each individual the tools to chart their own career path. As we know, if you don't see a way forward in an organization, you're much more likely to leave that organization, whether you're 25 or whether you're 65. And so one of their missions for connected thinking is making sure that when you get through that first few years in the company and saying, I've done a lot of work in bridges, but I really want to work on skyscrapers, that there is a community that you can start connecting to figure out, how do I learn more? Who are the right experts? How can I model my career on these people?
The aspect that I really like is you don't bring in a new technology or something like Cortex to just gather knowledge and then you have knowledge. It's something that you put in place that's then be a continuous layer that will build and build more and more, and of course adjust and change as people come and go, as projects spin up and spin down. So it's really a bloodline that's following the track of business and there to tap into whenever you can. And if it's been in place, the silver tsunami should never crest.
Right. And to break it down, the goal of this one of the goals is not to encourage retirement, but to prevent it. And looking at our egg timer, we are approaching 10 minutes, so...
Excellent. Topic 2, please, Chris, if you would, flip.
And topic 2.
All right, so we've got 10 minutes to discuss addressing employee onboarding, specifically document process automation. And you're going to hear us talk about the value of Teams plus Power Apps plus SharePoint. The customer voice that you're going to hear is HAVI. HAVI has 10,000 employees plus freelancers, and I say that explicitly because they talk about it, and we really want to showcase the value of people coming and going on and off projects. But they are global, and they are focused on innovating, optimizing, and managing the supply chain of some of the largest brands in the world. So we're going to set up a clip, and you will hear the voices of David Davies, who is the technology manager, and Thomas Pagno, who is head of user services, all regarding the centralizing of their different processes. Roll the clip.
We quickly saw the advantage and the potential of Teams and the Power Apps.
So by automating document processing, we can speed up all paper-based processes that we have.
Before the app, registration process could take 2 weeks. Now we managed to reduce the time to less than 40 minutes.
Microsoft Teams is allowing us to centralize many of the operations, such as SharePoint and messaging, voice communications.
Now we have all those forms, all those documents in one central place, and that central place is Teams.
So, Chris, we've often heard one of the biggest killers to adoption is putting in a new system in place that requires a ton of manual things that end users have to do. But when people start to think about automating, whether it's our tech or others, but just automating business processes, what would you say is the number one advantage, not just to be able to do that, but once it's in place?
I think the goal that people should be tacking toward is removing friction in the process. Information capture has been around for a long time. Email is a form of information capture. Over the past 10 years, smartphones, you can take pictures of things and email them to yourself. And anytime I'm moving information generation close to the moment of capture, I'm going to be more accurate. What does that mean? Well, the flip side is if we make it very easy for people to flow information into part of a system and expect that they're going to need to do a lot of things on a mobile device that are really well suited for them, or wait until they get, quote, back to the office, which might be their hotel room or a coffee place where they have better connectivity, to go enter data about what they were doing hours or days ago, that gap makes it much more likely that people will see the system as intrusive. The goal should be making it friction-free. So to use automation as much as possible to streamline that information gathering and to bring it realistically into that user interface so that people can do it without having to jump to a different system, so they can stay in line with their task and do it through the ordinary course of work.
One of the tangible things that I heard HAVI say that I think supports everything that you just mentioned was that they were able to take 2 weeks of engagement or onboarding time down to 40 minutes. And what this means, obviously, as they bring in freelancers, is that they have to spend a lot less time getting them up to speed. And as we know from our previous topic, that notion of once they leave the project, being able to make sure you capture and maintain what it is that they provided to the project. But as we hear technology, needs to adapt to the agility of business as business changes, whether that's super fast or relatively fast, or that it just is consistently and continuously changing, so too must the technology support that. So we see things like when somebody spins up a new team, and that notion of what's the template for the team? Can we get it started, the project and the people, much faster? Can we coordinate the sets of documents or the forms that need to be available for that project to kickstart it off with the right set of information, even the list down to list templating? I think there's a lot of technology that we're building, and of course how our partners can then implement it or our customers can implement it and leverage it purely for who's your audience. If your audience is freelancers, they come and go. We need to get them up to speed.
It's interesting. As you were saying that, it occurred to me, we focus a lot on individual onboarding. The team already exists. There's a new freelancer. There's 10 things they need to pay attention to. And rather than teach them the 10 systems they need to learn, can we bring all 10, or maybe realistically 7 or 9 of them, into the same team digital workplace so that can happen much more rapidly. But as you were talking about that, the team itself needs to be onboarded. If you think about the overall technical culture or operating culture, there's a constitution. There are implicit patterns and practices that get codified throughout the ordinary course of doing work. This is how a brand new customer project team kicks off and gets started. And some of the value of that, whether we realize it or not, is encoded inside the information architecture. These are the kinds of lists. These are the fields that you should keep track of on an issue. And by being able to take a whole brand new team to onboard it into the culture with those kind of tools, I think is really important. And what HAVI's been able to do by being able to use Power Apps to make sure that information is already there and staged, and in many ways setting a pattern so that people know, don't go off with PDFs and faxes and other things. We've already built this for you.
There's also the challenge of scale. So as they engage in these different projects, there may or may not be a power user on that team. But even if there were, you wouldn't want to always rely on them to come up with the form or to come up with the logic behind the form, because HAVI is the central body that does business in a certain way. That doesn't mean there isn't flexibility in what each of the teams can do, but if there's consistency and scale to getting started and then, of course, managing through the project and the outcome being something that can be either reported on, easily gathered, or plugged into the rest of everything beyond that project, I think that's the real notion. When they see that collaborative content, of course, the people that are managing and working with that content, how that all comes together across all the projects is a lot of the value that we heard in the video, but it's also not having to reinvent the wheel is saving them a ton of time.
Funny that you mentioned wheels. The example I was thinking of it, I was wondering, have you ever rented a car during a trip that's the same kind of car that you drive at home?
I mostly don't go for the same car. I go for the same tech. And I know this sounds a little trivial, but I really like using Android Auto because it has a nice interface and it just makes it a lot easier for me for the GPS, for listening to podcasts. So if I know that's a part of the car that I'm renting, it's an easier decision. Like I just know I can plug my phone in and it works like I do all year round.
Right. The example I was going to use is when I rent a car that's similar or the same as to what I drive here at home in Washington State, I don't have to look to see where's the light switch. That whole implicit knowledge that comes to me, it is much simpler. And the same thing happens inside teams. If you have that, a parallel structure of these are the sites, these are the channels, these are the tabs. We always have Power Apps as the second tab up. There's instant familiarity. There's like, I've done this before. Okay, I can be productive right away.
Now, true or false, for each of your rented cars, do you apply a Patriot sticker to the back?
I have not done that.
But you're thinking about it.
There is a movie, I'm not going to mention its title on the air, with folks who took a rental car and then painted it up with stripes and took it to a demolition derby. Savvy listeners will know the movie I mentioned. It's a wonderful idea, but no, I'm not going to encourage branding other people's experience in a way that's unfamiliar to them.
I totally get it, and I think that Hertz or others certainly support, and thank you for not doing that.
So let me ask you, Mark, when you think about Microsoft's mission in the modern workplace or digital workspaces, what's our goal as a provider of technology with the combination of SharePoint, Teams, and the Power Platform?
A lot of it is around what is the end user's front door. Where are they spending their time, either per project or just throughout their day? And more, it is not just going to a SharePoint site or portal, and it's not just cracking open Outlook or using certain technology X or Y. But we are seeing it as more of a central location where they're collaborating with other people, not just working on individual items. And our offering there is Microsoft Teams. And so part of what the teams within Microsoft are building are a lot of those great integrations between portals, being able to bring those in and having a company-wide experience in Microsoft Teams. And I say that across a number of products, not just SharePoint. There's also the notion of if I am managing a project and it happens to be leveraging a front end that happens to be a Power App that is pulling or pushing information to a SharePoint list, that Power App, even if it's placed on a page, is going to come in as a first-person Tier 1 experience in Teams. But I think the biggest value is in the context of where the team needs it and where they work with each other the most.
When you think it's great, when the workforce becoming more and more mobile, there's a challenge to how do I get people to start using all of the great Power Apps and other things that people have built? And by having it as a separate publication process, there's an extra challenge. You're asking people to find it and discover it. And being able to integrate all those things into Teams makes things run much more quickly and lets you accomplish your goal in 10 minutes or less.
Very nice. All right, so for topic number 3, it will be all about streamlining communications. And Chris, the challenge to you and I is to use these 10 minutes in 8 minutes. Go.
So in streamlining communications, the example Mark and I are going to share with you today is Marks & Spencer. Over 10,000 employees, a global retail giant with more than 1,000 storefront operations in the UK and beyond. The voices you're going to hear in today's clip are Dwayne Berg, who oversees workplace productivity, Srinivas Narula, who is the lead developer for workplace productivity, and Scott Townend, who's the business sponsor for retail business development. This entire clip is about using Power Apps through SharePoint and Teams to be able to transform the way people receive information on the go on the retail selling floor. Let's take a listen.
Using SharePoint lists and Power Apps, our activity app lets us track new promotions and efficiently distribute them to store managers across all of our locations.
They can go into that particular area, they can look at that key event, and they can then press on that. And then what that does is takes them to the actual documents that they need to view. So not only can they see when the events were happening, they could actually see the document itself and actually read the document whilst on the shop floor.
Activity app was a huge success for both the head office and the stores. They were easily communicating each other for passing information and all this stuff.
It's meant that time spent trying to get onto workstation has been reduced, and therefore they're freeing up time to be more facing our customers, more on the shop floor, and therefore adding much more value to their roles.
So you heard them talk a lot about the activity app. This is a specific app that they use on their show floor for people to be able to look up information or to capture information and share it with other people. And the way they built it specifically was with Power App against a SharePoint list. And so in this instance, it's one application for many people to leverage to build up a ton of information and insights, sometimes in real time or near real time, to share with other people, especially when they're looking up something so that they can answer the customer that's asking that question right in front of them. You know a little bit more behind the scenes of the problems that they were trying to solve and the design of this particular app.
Once again, if it's a customer in London in a video, why am I not there?
But you know a lot around Power Apps and,
Yes.
the list that they designed. How would you go about describing the approach that they took and, of course, the outcome, which now we can see?
The approach that they took followed Sue Hanley's mantra fairly closely about looking at business outcomes. One of the common numbers that you look at in retail operations is same-store sales. And one of the things that they saw was that there's a direct correlation between the amount of time that managers and middle managers spend on the selling floor to improving those retail operations. So they were backing away from that, saying, how can we make people more efficient by helping them get out onto the selling floor to be able to be there and talk to customers? The application that they built was patterned on a SharePoint portal they had already been doing using Office 365, which is to take promotions, drive them to a portal, and send people emails saying there's a new promotion, go look to it, which accomplishes an information goal, but it also was removing management from the selling floor. So they could go to a back office, log into a kiosk, read their email, look up the promotions. And so it was very much designed to be an extension of a pattern they already had, but take advantage of a relatively new mobile technology to be able to deliver information not over emails and portals, which still exists, but to accelerate that by delivering it into the mobile devices that people were carrying.
So through the lens of saving time, let's talk about time to market from an application perspective. For this activity app, if we would have built it in the past as a farm solution with some deeper logic that may or may not have run on the SharePoint server, but more from the server days, in this category that we talk about productivity apps, what was the biggest difference of how they could approach building this app today than if they had done it maybe 10 years ago?
I'll make it, in the 8-minute dictum, very, very simple. It would have taken them months before. Being able to deploy this through Power Apps took them a few weeks. Their next stage, taking this and rolling it out to every user using Teams, was calibrated in a matter of days.
Nice. So obviously with the time left is then just get back to business. And part of that for them is the people who are working with customers on the show floor. And one way we categorize that particular type of employee or worker, we call them first-line worker. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's just a Microsoft term, but just a way to describe people that don't sit at a desk all day, may or may not have some of our full applications, but are working through the web or mobile. This activity app was designed for their first-line workers, the store employees. What did it do for them? What was the biggest advantage for them?
One of the things that I've heard is that it helped them realize that the company was thinking about them and their needs. They had already deployed mobile devices to all of the workforce. So asking people to then put it in their pocket, walk back to the office was like, well, why are we investing in this technology and not carrying it forward? So I think it was just that implicit knowledge that here in the 20s, people are on the go. And the things that we come to expect from consumer technology, there's an app for everything in your preferred app store. Being able to have more and more apps to help solve your business needs resonates well across multiple generations.
All right, so within the last 2 minutes of our actual 4 minutes that are left, in the context of streamlining communications, what does this all mean for the life cycle of people that are engaging with the content?
One of the things that Marks & Spencer has been doing that's related to this is extending that dialogue. If you think about it, this is a dialogue between the home office and each of the managers across the stores. How do they extend that mission out to customers? So they also empowered their managers to be able to receive these promotions and say, you know what, I want to tell the customers in my immediate vicinity who have subscribed to me about this. So they added the capability to be able to go in and say, I want to take a picture of this promotion happening in the store. I'm going to add my own blurb and use Power Apps to be able to automate that so that they can continue that dialogue and personalize it in a way that hopefully makes more sense to the customers and makes the customers feel more seen and more likely to return to a Marks & Spencer. If you've been in London, it's hard to escape Marks & Spencer, but finding lots of reasons to bring people in and have that more personalized experience is essential to unlocking their competitive advantage.
I really like the way that they've addressed the now, but it's also thinking, how can I address the next person's now so that they don't have to go looking for something? And last thought on Marks & Spencer's, I really want to go with you next time you're in the UK. And if we can invite Spencer Harbar, our friend of the community, and so that you can introduce us as Mark and Spencer. Just thinking that might be something that will...
I should have seen where you're going with that, but I did not.
All right, so let's turn the corner out of our topics and talk about upcoming events.
SharePoint Saturdays are a great opportunity for users in IT to learn from and engage with the local community. And best of all,
What?
Best of all,
Free?
Free.
Still
Free.
Excellent.
And not just SharePoint, but increasingly covering the range of solutions for Microsoft. Coming up January 25th, Office 365 Saturday in San Diego. On Twitter at SPS_SD. And we'll put the link to the site in show notes.
On February 1st is SharePoint Saturday St. Louis. We'll have a link in the show notes, and you can follow them on Twitter at TechEventSSTL.
And if there's an upcoming SharePoint Saturday near you that we haven't discussed, you can probably find it on their website at spsevents.org.
So, Chris, you had mentioned London, and in that vein, you were talking about Ignite the Tour. So, if you were unable to be at Ignite in Orlando last year, we've brought the tour around 30 cities, and they've started in 2019 and continue in 2020. In January, the cities include where you'll find Chris in London, but also in...
Seoul, Osaka, Milan, and Johannesburg. And at every one of those cities, you can look for 4 sessions from the consolidated SharePoint, OneDrive, Yammer, and Stream team.
And be sure to check out the new podcast that follows the tour. It's called The Uptake, and this is with Anna Chu. In each episode, she talks with tour city locals in the tech community, Ignite speakers, and other current issues in tech, personal career journeys, professional learning, how-tos, and more. You're lucky because the first episode is out this week, and it includes Simon Denton from Mott MacDonald, who we mentioned earlier in the show. Look for The Uptake with Anna Chu on the techcommunity.microsoft.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Coming up next month, longtime event friend of SharePoint, SP TechCon, is returning to San Francisco, February 18th to 21st. It's focused on solutions for folks working with SharePoint, OneDrive, Office 365, on-premises, hybrid, cloud, and more. There'll be workshops, breakouts, networking opportunities, and Brad McCabe delivering the Microsoft keynote with the latest innovations in Microsoft 365. And you can learn more at sptechcon.com/west.
One more thing that we have from a virtual perspective is a conference that's fully online between March 2nd through the 6th. This is called GlobalCon 1. Inferring that somewhere down the road there will be a GlobalCon 2. This is the group from Collab 365 covering a ton of the latest knowledge and training for SharePoint, Teams, Cortex, Azure, Power Apps, Power Automate, and power this global community. I'll be joining in delivering a session that's titled Plan for Governance to Transform Teamwork with Microsoft 365, alongside a ton of great content, and you can view it from the comforts of your own home or office. So we'll put a link in the show notes, and you can follow the hashtag GlobalCon1.
And finally, coming up in less than 2 months, the AIM conference. AIM 20 returns to Dallas, Texas on March 3rd through 5th. You can find out more at aimconference.com. If you've been looking for more information about everything that we're doing with content services, Project Cortex, SharePoint, and more, and you're looking for a bridge between the events last fall in Ignite with SPC coming up mid-year, AIM, we're bringing a very large team for Microsoft. We'll be delivering a keynote, a number of breakout sessions, side meetings, user panels, Microsoft-based receptions. We've got the biggest booth ever in the history of the AIM conference coming to Dallas. I can't wait to be there, and hopefully you can't either.
We hope that those are a great set of events that you can plug into, and certainly there are always more when it comes to a regional basis. Keep tuned in. A lot of great resources for a lot of the recurring places where you can plug in. Thank you for listening to today's episode on The Interzone. Check out our show page for links to all of what was discussed today and more. You can go to aka.ms/theinterzone. And if you're curious about other Microsoft shows, check out aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts and listen to a new show today.
We'd love you to reach out with your questions or feedback for the SharePoint engineering and product teams. You can email us at theinterzone@microsoft.com or on Twitter at SharePoint, at @mcashman, and at cmcnulty2000. Tell all your friends, colleagues, neighbors, coffee stand people, and more about the show. Share the SharePoint love. You can subscribe at a lift line at your favorite ski mountain or wherever you happen to get your podcasts.
We are your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty. You've been listening to The Interzone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet.